Resuming from the June 2018 Road and Track magazine, Preservation Hall from the Revs Institute. As the automobile rolls into an uncertain future, the Revs Institute, part archive, part template of worship, collects and protects motoring history. Even after nearly a decade, Miles Collier still gets a visceral thrill as he scans the first floor of the Revs Institute. Jiminy Crickets, says Collier, founder of the museum and research facility in Naples, Florida, just down the road from me. Every time I walk in here, I'm totally blown away. At the same time, I'm horrified as to how much of my sum and substance this all comprises, and what it takes to keep it going. As you can imagine, it is considerable. The place is stuffed with masterpieces, the Renoirs and Van Goghs of the auto world. 10 feet away, a 1962 Ferrari 400 Super America gleams under fluorescent lights. Only 46 of these cars were built, and Enzo Ferrari himself owned this one. Upstairs is the first American manufactured car to win a Formula One Grand Prix, Dan Gurney's 1967 Eagle, often called the most beautiful open-wheel car ever built. It sits near the Jorgensen Eagle that Bobby Unser drove to Indy 500 victory in 1975. Alphas, Bentleys, Bugattis. The New York Times once called this group of vehicles the finest sports car collection in America. Collier, 70 now, owns it all, and he is a bit of a mystery. This much is known. He is a fine artist, philanthropist, and scion of one of the wealthiest families in America, who is so publicity shy he refuses to be photographed. More important, he is a man on a mission, one that the Revs Institute embodies, to proselytize the important role that automobile has played in human history and to make the car a subject of serious academic scholarship. Quote, "The automobile is the single most important technological artifact of the 20th century, Collier says. It really did shape the world in what we find in ourselves today. Something with those kinds of credentials deserved to receive respect and examination," end quote. Since Collier founded the Revs Institute in 2009, he and his staff have labored to turn the hobby of car collecting into a vocation. The Institute has formed a partnership with Stanford University to create a transdisciplinary field to study cars and their influence on society. The Revs Institute has possibly the largest specialized automotive library in the world. A 12,000 square foot workshop is dedicated to high standards of auto restoration and innovating ways to care for antique machinery. As someone who prides himself on the historical knowledge, Collier knows as well as anyone that the automobile industry is on the verge of the most spectacular transformation since the dawn of the motoring age. Autonomous cars and electric vehicles may eventually make the internal combustion engine, and perhaps the human driver, go the way of the horse and buggy. Quote, "Change in our high technology world is a fact of life," he says. The real issue is, are people going to want to engage with an artifact that in some sense resembles an automobile in the future? The uncertainty is almost palpable in the halls of the Revs Institute. To understand why Collier cares so much, you have to go back 2 generations. Baron Collier, Miles' grandfather, made a killing selling advertising in subways and on streetcars across the country. He invested a fortune in South Florida, becoming the state's largest landowner, including thousands of acres of what the Associated Press described in 1952 as primeval wilderness of the Everglades, inhabited only by alligators, panthers, poisonous snakes, wildcats, strange birds, and a few silent Seminole Indians. The Collier family developed the slithering wilderness into the South Florida we know today. Thus, a huge section is Collier County. Side note, South Florida is more considered Miami, and that's not that. This is more Southwest Florida, and it's not South Florida. So they kind of got that wrong. Just had to correct that real quick. As this was happening, Collier's father, C. Miles Collier, and uncle, Sam Collier, played an outsized role in the emergence of sports car racing in the U.S. During the pre-war years, they founded the Automobile Racing Club of America, which morphed into the Sports Car Club of America, or SCCA, and introduced the MG brand to the U.S. After the war, they helped organize the first public road race at Watkins Glen, and in 1950, raced at Le Mans. They wrote about the latter experience for a fledgling publication called Road and Track. Not long after, Sam was killed at the Glen. In his honor, the Sam Collier Memorial Grand Prix of Endurance was organized at an airfield in Central Florida. That evolved into the 12 Hours of Sebring. Miles Collier came along amid all this, his family so famous that his birth was announced in the New York Times. Before he was old enough to walk, Collier was hooked on cars. It must be some genetic imprinting, he says. Collier began shaping his 115 car collection in the 1980s. They were carefully organized and grouped in different sections of the building, which is reinforced to protect against the most severe Florida hurricanes. Quote, "The cars here are my interpretation of transcendent technology and excellence in aesthetics. The cars that changed the way the world thought about automobiles," he says. End quote. The first floor holds mostly sports cars, with a wing dedicated to Porsche. The collection also includes a fleet that once belonged to Briggs Cunningham, a 20th century automotive pioneer and a friend of the elder Colliers. The Floors 1937 Delahaye, bodied by Figoni and Falaschi, is one of the most striking cars ever to roll down a road. Most of the collection's race cars are on the second floor. Among them are two Ford GT40s. One was the first to wear the Gulf Oil livery. There's also a 1948 Ferrari Tipo 166, the first Ferrari model to win a major race and the first imported to the United States. Sam Collier died after crashing this very car. If there is a flagship here, it's a 1939 Mercedes-Benz W154 Silver Arrow Grand Prix car, which competed in Europe on September 3, 1939, the day Britain and France declared war on Germany. It's easy to see why Collier would call these vehicles transcendent. They embody game-changing ideas and ambitions that mark critical moments. If all this technology goes away, he says, referring to the internal combustion engine and the art of driving, then historically all this is clearly very, very important. That is why in 2014 he opened the Revs Institute to the public. In keeping with its mission of being the premier destination for automotive research and study, it is open as a museum and research library 3 days a week. Collier believes that celebrating the automobile is the best way to spread the gospel of its importance. Quote, "Part of the way you educate people about the significance of cars is to let people see them," he says. "Educate and thrill and charm and seduce people into the fascination with these things," end quote. Preservation is a major part of the Institute's effort. Collier and his staff hold regular synopsia for collectors to disseminate ideas about how to better caretakers, how to make decisions on what to buy, how to determine whether to restore a vehicle or not, and more. For example, preserving old cars is not easy or cheap. For example, Revs Institute techs exercise the cars regularly. Quote, "We have to keep everything running," says Scott George, the Institute's vice president. "You've got air-cooled cars, water-cooled cars, hydraulic brakes. All those systems have to be kept functional," end quote. Most of the vehicles in the Collier collection are driven on public roads, in rallies, or on private racetracks. A visit to the Revs workshop is the auto equivalent of walking into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. Many of Collier's cars are restored to their original state with obsessive attention to detail, while others maintain patina from years of use. Dents and paint scratches can illuminate the life of an automobile has lived and the companions it has kept. The day of my visit, craftsmen were recreating the belly pan on a French 1919 ballet, that raced at the Indy 500. Jacked up next to it was a swoopy 1962 Lotus Elite undergoing a mechanical and cosmetic rebuild. There's a paint shop and a machine shop in this space, yet across all of it, the floor appeared as clean as a surgical table. Another goal is to attract the attention of younger generations. The Revs program at Stanford has offered classes such as Judging Historical Significance, the Automobile, and Mobility and Entrepreneurship, plus an open Garage Talk series of speaking events. Thanks to the Institute, Stanford students have had the opportunity to judge the world's most important vintage car show, the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance. Revs also employs interns in the workshop and library. Archiving is a critical part of what the Institute does, because the importance of the automobile is not just the vehicle itself, but the ancillary items orbiting its existence. Photos, marketing materials, shop manuals, anything that could interest the most esoteric car nerd. Among the impressive and eclectic catalog are a signed copy of Enzo Ferrari's memoirs, a pair of bear fur gloves used by drivers in the 1920s before cars had heaters, vintage racing goggles and trophies, original blueprints of championship race cars, and vast collections of periodicals and other publications. Quote, "Not a lot of car collections have as many staff working in the library as it does on the cars," George says. "All of it aims to spread Collier's message. The thing I'm most interested in is archaeology of these things," he says. Archaeology is essentially the study of how human behavior has been shaped over time by the creation of artifacts and technology, the way people used the automobile and looked at them, the way cars were built and maintained. All aspects of their physicality are of great importance to me. That's what we're trying to do here, to be a thought leader in what these things mean, how to think about them, and how to care for them. Somebody needs to be the call for action to protect, admire, and appreciate these things for what they are," end quote. To that end, Collier has an ambition to create Revs fellowships to support the next generation of thinkers and caretakers in this arena, master craftsmen, historical writers, etc. He also likes the idea of creating a wing for cars that change the world. This part of the collection would be less about game-changing technology and achievement and more about roles cars played in people's everyday lives. Collier singles out the 1964.5 Ford Mustang, the first-generation Toyota Prius, and the seminal Chrysler minivan, a Paradigm-initiating car. There would be a Citroën DS19, a Fiat Cinquecento, even a, quote, "a horrendous GM thing from the 1980s," end quote. that would illuminate why America's largest corporation, quote, was on the fast skid to oblivion, quote, end quote, at the time. Quote, there is something about the automobile that appeals to the fundamental DNA in people, he says, and I think I know what that is. Man has always been a toolmaker. Man has always been a creature of wanderlust. So what is more appropriate for man than the toolmaker and wanderer than to create a machine for movement, end quote. For someone with such a passion for history and old technology, Collier is anything but defeatist or cynical when it comes to the future of mobility. Quote, my thesis is that the things that make the automobile so pervasive are fundamental human drives that are not going away with changing technology, he says, end quote. People are still going to want to go to places, to choose the timing of their travel, and to choose with whom they travel. Quote, how much will insurance companies and government or quasi-government organizations interfere with our ability to drive automobiles, he's asked rhetorically. The jury is out, but I'm an optimist, end quote. He sees the future in which self-driving technology will be a modality rather than a constant. Quote, it may be mandated at certain times and places, like getting in and out of LA, San Francisco, New York, or Boston. They may say that nothing but autonomous vehicles can go into Manhattan. That's fine. Who in their right mind wants to drive in Manhattan? End quote. Collier concedes that some of the vintage cars he adores could be legislated off the road. Quote, gradually, the arc of technology is taking cars a certain age of performance envelope out of the mix, he says. That's sad but unavoidable unless you live in some rural backwater somewhere. With respect to normal traffic, I think cars from the 1960s on up are still competent. That being said, anyone who says they want to drive their 1912 Mercer on modern roads today has a suicide complex, end quote. Collier does not see some great faceless levation taking away our ability to drive cars, however. His optimism even extends to electric vehicles. Quote, 100% of torque and 0 RPM. Who doesn't love that? The day of the burnout has truly arrived, he enthused. End quote. That is, assuming battery technology improves so EVs cost less and have better range, and we figure out how to create electricity sustainably. His face contorts into a mischievous smile. Quote, of course, there's one thing about being a pundit about anything, is that you are virtually condemned to be wrong, he says. The one thing I know about the future is that it's certainly going to surprise us, end quote. Then and now, rough automobile, birds of a feather. 3 decades ago, a tiny shop in Germany built the world's fastest car. R&T returns to drive its successor. Lois Ruff is the kind of man who acquires stuff. A handful of Porsche 911 roof panels stacked like the inside of a Russian nesting doll, an office chandelier made from old cylinder jugs, or the brand new shell of a 1989 911. Tucked in a warehouse next to more classic Porsches than you can easily count. The tub has fenders and doors but no VIN, just a stamped part number on the dash. It has never been built into a car. I bought about 35 of these shells from the factory when they were new, he says. 1989, before production stopped. Then 993s and 964s. We have a few left over. Estonia Ruff waves a hand at the tub. Quote, my husband is a man of vision, she says, chuckling. The line is half serious, half married couple joke. She delivers it with the kind of ease that comes from giving a lot of tours in a place you've come to know extremely well. Ruff's wife helps run the family business. She is thin and cheerful, with frizzy electric brown hair. You can hear it in her voice. The fact that her husband would, if he could, buy everything he owns 10 times over, even if it made less business sense than a bag full of monkeys. Because that is what happens when you let an object you love saturate your life, when it supports 65 employees, when it takes your name to 211 miles an hour on the nose of a yellow Porsche-shaped bullet. As of that moment, the fastest production car on Earth, on a wet day in the spring of 1987. That last moment was a landmark, both for this magazine and for Ruff himself. It occurred in service of an iconic R&T cover story called The World's Fastest Cars, where we took 9 vehicles to Volkswagen's 15.5-mile Ira-Leisen research oval in Germany. Ruff's car, which he called CTR, was based on an ordinary Porsche 911. It wore a Ruff badge and Ruff VIN because the German government had certified him as a manufacturer. Someone at Ira-Leisen thought the CTR looked like a yellowbird, or flitting across the horizon, and the name stuck. Our drivers were Paul Friere, a Belgian, and Phil Hill, an American. They ran on a track slickened by rain before the advent of electronic stability control or road cars with significant aerodynamic downforce. Hill was the first American Formula One champion, a 3-time Le Mans winner, and a brilliant, quirky statesman of American motorsport. Friere was R&T's European editor, an erudite, multilingual journalist racer who drove in F1 for Ferrari and who once won Le Mans overall. Friere and Hill are gone now, but Ruff, 68, still works at the same address. He still famously treats visitors like family, partly because his shop is in the German farming hamlet of Pfaffenhausen, a mapmaker's sneeze 60 miles east of Munich. You don't get there by accident, and certainly not without knowing the story. The Yellowbird wasn't Ruff's first car. but its underdog mystique still orbits his work. Most roughs are based on a contemporary Porsche. Every car from Pfaffenhausen cost well into six figures and is built in a production run that could fit on a city block. Ruff says he engineers his cars with an eye towards mechanical involvement, and that his customers are happy to pay for a handmade work with history, which is partly why, when the original CTR turned 30, he built a new one. He dubbed it CTR 2017 and painted it the same Porsche Blossom Yellow. The body was carbon fiber over a carbon punt frame with steel subframes. When a non-running display version debuted at the 2017 Geneva Auto Show, it promptly imploded the automotive internet because the automotive internet loves all things that even hint on the intersection of fast old Porsche and a good story. Predictably, the new CTR uses a few Porsche parts. Among them is a 700 horsepower twin-turbo water-cooled 3.6-liter flat six with roots in the company's Mezger engine family. Non-Porsche nerd translation. Mezger principal engines powered both the Le Mans-focused 911 GT1 and the first two generations of 911 GT3. They're named for Hans Mezger, the Stuttgart engineer who chiefs their development. Ruff says his new car will exceed 223 miles an hour. No exterior panel is shared with any Porsche. The 2017 car is 2.8 inches longer in wheelbase than the original Bird for high-speed stability and is nearly as wide as the famously hippie 959. There are double A-arms at each corner, with pushrod-operated Sachs dampeners. The design features a host of clever styling tricks, from wider doors to broader headlight nacelles. All are aimed at helping the car look remarkably like an old 911 until you park it next to the one, at which point it looks alien and ever so slightly larger and nicely funky. Developing all of this cannot have been cheap. The Ruff's polite demur. Quote, "We don't know if anyone would like it," Estonia says. "You never do, so we figured maybe, if they don't, we make just one car for us, but they did." End quote. Development is ongoing. Production starts in late 2018. All 30 build slots, an estimated 750 pounds, I believe, apiece, were sold by the end of the Geneva show. Ruff returned an estimated 750 German dollars apiece were sold by the end of the Geneva show. Ruff returned there this year with a running prototype, driven across a snowy Europe. He also shipped in a display example of the car's frame. It was almost pathologically perfect, with spellbinding weave structure. The tubs are built by Jurg, a Bavarian firm that makes DTM frames for BMW. Last year at the show, people kept asking what it was based on, Estonia says. So many people on the stand, and we kept trying to tell them it's not based on anything. It's ours. They didn't understand. So this year, we could say it's based on this. Ruff has built two other generations of CTR since 1987. The most recent, the mid-engine CTR3, is still in production. That car was styled with help from Freeman Thomas, the American designer behind the first Audi TT. Thomas also drew the new CTR. Predictably, he is a longtime Porsche freak. In addition to working for the Marquis in the 80s, he co-founded R Group, an American club for hot-rodded early 911s. Thomas is present the week we visit Ruff. I ask if it was intimidating, muddling with one of the greatest designs in history. Not at all. I've grown up with this shape since the 1960s. In our group, we learned the ins and outs of these cars. We weren't afraid of them. And Alois was fearless, I think, in the 70s and 80s. He just did whatever he needed to make the cars work better. I mentioned that old Porsche always seems a lot more appealing when you see an owner not taking the car too seriously, making it their own. Design isn't a one-time thing, he adds. You go through it with life. A lot of it is figuring out why you like what you do. The shop itself is open and bright, with tailored floors and large windows. Ruff the man was born next door in house number 19, which still stands. His father, Alois Sr., bought the villa at the corner in 1939. At the time, it also held a small park. After the war, the senior Ruff tore down the park and built a shop. The younger Ruff grew it. I step into a dyno room with Claudio Schrupp, one of Ruff's technicians. Schrupp is young and blonde and broad-shouldered, only a few years out of school, with Hazat wrenches and a large blue tool cabinet. He rolls his box around in a kind of walking grin. Ruff has two dynos, one for water-cooled engines and one for air-cooled. Schrupp spends much of his time on the latter. He does not work on Wassergil, he says, cheerily in lumpy English. Only the old cars, my choice. In another life, before becoming a journalist, I was the world's slowest professional mechanic. So before my visit, I asked Ruff if I could work a little in his shop to get to know the place. Ruff walks me to the 3.4-liter twin-turbo flat six of the first customer CTR, a 1987 model owned by an American collector. The car came to Ruff for restoration, and the engine, now in prep for a rebuild, hasn't been apart since the 80s. We're to unbolt the motor from the dyno, move it to the engines department, and pull its turbos and exhaust. Ruff's air-cooled dyno was built in 1983. The walls are unfinished clay brick and so close that the equipment doesn't so much live in the room as wear it like a hat. The dyno operator is separated from the engine by a thick glass window that Ruff salvaged from the demolition of a local bank. The room's output is now fed through a computer, but the original analog torque gauge is still present. It looks large enough to weigh a cow. The engine starts with a cough, then snarls into tenor notes in the middle of its range. Factory Porsche turbo engines often go hoarse under load, like a vacuum cleaner. Every Ruff I've ever heard has somehow managed to be more operatic. Schrupp breaks out his grin again. A very nice engine. After a few minutes, we let the motor cool. When we come back, I disconnect the intercooler air feed while Schrupp starts unhooking fuel hoses. The American's engine made more than 530 horsepower at 6,000 RPM, he says. Every CTR1 engine is a good engine. They always make over 500 horsepower. Which sounds like a line, but his shoulders and eyebrows shrug in a way that makes it believable. We move the motor from a dyno room to a stand in the engine department. Schrupp and I work silently for a bit, removing turbo plumbing. Then I spill a few dollars of oil on the floor while unbolting a feed line. Schrupp, organizing hardware, chuckles. Our boss hates us, he says, pointing to the spill. He puffs his cheeks and mimes his hands and exploding off his head. Kneeling to clean up, I notice that shop floor is spotless, even in the dark corners under the benches, where most working shops are filthy. It occurs to me that certain parts of the world will always be quietly satisfying, like whenever you discover that a famously detail-oriented person is, in fact, attentive to detail. Later, as I'm putting away tools, Estonia pops into the room. I was impressed by the American engine, I say, given that it had never been apart. You know, the 469 horsepower number that we gave to the press for that car, that was the worst case scenario. Estonia says, more laughter. The pavement shines in the video. Obviously wet. Former R&T art director Richard Barron bought a camcorder to Ira Lassen. I learned this over dinner at Ruff's house, a tidy farm near a small river. As Estonia fries schnitzel, Ruff pops the tape into the VHS stick and plops onto the couch. The TV lights up with German parking lot and a gaggle of 80s poster cars. A young Peter Egan joking after a Callaway Corvette blows its engine. Then straight line testing at Hockenheim, plus a dozen happy little moments not in print, like when Phil Hill climbs into the trunk of an AMG Hammer on one of Fierre's acceleration runs to help the traction. Just give it a little more hell, Hill says. Then they shut the trunk on him and Fierre lights up the tires. One run around the oval left Fierre wide-eyed. On the tape, he sits in the yellow bird, a soft smile blinking rapidly. Some German word, then more German. Ruff translates 337. In the other direction, 2 kilometers slower. 337 kilometers per hour is 209.4 miles an hour. More than 7,000 RPM in fifth gear. A legend, visibly giddy. The 211 mile an hour run came with Hill later when the track had dried. It's a difficult image to shake, so I decided not to shake it. I let the footage play in my head the next afternoon when Ruff and I drove the Bird and his new prototype CTR to nearby hills. The weather, Ruff tells me, is what the Germans call hairdryer. Storms blowing over the Alps, giving clear skies and a dusting of rapidly melting snow. The land is covering in something like lodgepole's pines, pinned straight and dense as hairbrush bristles. They block enough of the low winter sun that the road goes dark for long stretches. The contrast makes the cars glow. We stopped for photography at a cluster of small houses. The car was going to be red, Ruff says. All Porsche's test cars were then Guards red because it popped in sunlight. We had it loaded in the paint gun. Yellow was at the time environmentally unfriendly. I said, just one car, why not? Then clouds at Ira Lassen, and it was the only car at shoot that looked right on film. And the house cooler was forever set, and that was that. We came for the new CTR, but Ruff offers to let me drive the old one. I glance at Tom Salt, our photographer, setting up a shot with the 2017 car. Words become difficult. I'll be a bit. I'm gone maybe too long. My head barely clears the dash. My seats are low Recaro shells with harnesses, the same type as in the video. The engine fires on the first crank but is laggy and smart and snorty around town. Small throttle openings at low RPM produce hiccups and surges, so I don't use small throttle openings. Big throttle gives 1-2 beat before the car hurtles off. The cockpit is 80s 911, comfy but empty. A Blaupunkt radio, antenna taped to the windshield, thin carpet, and integrated roll cage. The 5-speed gearbox is slow, the shifter indifferent, and long throw. The pedals are floor hinged, long travel, and an acquired taste. All like any old 911 because the car is one, VIN or no. Also, like any 911, the CTR is work to drive. Every corner is a juggle of boost and rear weight bias, managing torque splits to pavement. But the good bits are more raw. Compliance, a steering wheel dancing out bubbles of feedback, plus perpetually adjusting balance if you talk with the wheels and pedals in the right language. A friend who once drove this exact car told me that it can burn its tires off in second gear on a warm day. In the cold, you can do that in third. The needle just fits around the tack in explosive rubber band burst. If you're hustling at all, you focus on managing grunt, working to keep the car of the rear happy. It all feels wonderfully goony, and it suggests that It would somehow feel just as goony with more grip on warmer rubber and asphalt. Fast 911s are rarely goony. You also cannot drive an original CTR without feeling like maybe more 911 shaped cars should feel the same. Or feel like Ruff's prototype for that matter. The old bird was built on Porsche's narrow Carrera body for reducing drag. Standard 911 turbos use fatter fenders. From the outside, the new one has a less visible flare but seems wide as a bus by comparison. Its interior is a mismatch of exposed control boxes and neatly clamped wire, like the guts of a military airplane. The adjustable steering column, lifted from a 997 generation 911, has no cosmetic trim. The bottom for the standard traction control is temporarily zip tied to the dash. Almost everything is Alcantara covered or bare carbon, and obviously unfinished. On the road, the car is an odd mix of familiar sensations. The hollow-boned, whole-body renaissance that carbon cars give over bumps, the tiny pillars and cloth dash of a 993, a sound like the bird, with the same sing-songy, ripped, but more manicured yow at the top of the tach. Low RPM gives zero hiccups but a whiff of turbo lag. Enough to make the car feel beastie but not require any special treatment. I get maybe an hour at the wheel, a mix of town and Autobahn, mostly with Ruff as passenger. He reminds me repeatedly that the CTR is a prototype. He doesn't like the pedals, wants to tweak the suspension tune. He asks that Salt not photograph the unfinished engine bay, so as not to be prejudged. We head onto the Autobahn. I blink, blast to 150 miles an hour between patches of traffic. Ruff is silent until clear road, at which point he waves a hand and gives an instant go, go, go. The CTR currently uses an experimental 7-speed manual that may not see production. 7th is a practical gear, low enough to help highway pull. I barely touch it on the Autobahn, hanging out instead in the lower gears. Towing the throttle on boost makes the cockpit echo with a kind of whistling air death noise. Intake bonk out shouting the exhaust and bouncing off the uninsulated carbon roof. The prototype is far faster than the bird, though the calmer chassis of the new car makes it feel less manic. The manual lag of its engine can also lull you into forgetting its explosive potential, an approach that is mirrored by the rest of the car. The hydraulically assisted steering is nicely light at low speed but a little dry on feel. Same for the suspension, which can seem stiff-kneed and a shade over-damped while cruising around. But if you lean into it, Ruff's prototype grows fluid and limber, both involving and ferociously transparent. I want the car to be part of you, he says, an extension of your genes, and to be this way without all the electronic gadgets, pure and honest, no filtering. In 1987, a car's top speed was an immediate, practical gauge of its engineering. In 2018, that number is beyond irreverent. The world's fastest cars are now so potent as to share little with ordinary passenger machines. Autobahns are so crowded that even an 87 CTR is hard-pressed to show its full talent. The current production car speed king, the 278-mile-an-hour Koenigsegg Agera RS, will likely never demonstrate that number in public. Even if it does, the majority of humanity is now more interested in whatever Elon Musk is doing than in which oligarch special sits at the tip of the tax spear. The layout is the funny part. On paper, a carbon fiber machine shaped like an air-cooled 911 seems both impossible, future and past stuck, backward think. But maybe, decades from now, as major car makers grow more occupied with automation and sexless mobility solutions, Ruff's blueprint will be something of a way forward. Maybe it will prestige a way forward with more affordable iron. Will recreate old loves as a skein of personality over hyper-evolved tech, chasing feel above all. That view is undeniably optimistic, but then so is the tiny family company tooling up to build something like the new CTR. The car represents one of the things I've always loved about Ruff's work, and about this business in general, the notion that the possible is rarely defined by the rules we know, the kind of emotional momentum that you can't measure up or pop into a spreadsheet. It's a vision, and all the better for it.